The key to life, Seneca writes in one of his most famous letters, is to acquire one thing every day. He says we got to find something that fortifies us against poverty and adversity, that steels us against death, that teaches us, that opens our minds to something. And indeed, his famous exchange with Lucilius, what comes to us as letters from a Stoic, is Seneca and his friend exchanging one piece of advice back and forth. And his point is that you always want to be talking and thinking and exploring these ideas. That Stoic philosophy isn't this thing that you have studied. It has to be a thing that you are studying. Even though I have been writing and talking about Stoicism for almost 20 years now, I'm still in the middle of my journey. And I'm so lucky on the Daily Stoic podcast, which has done more than 150 million downloads since it started, that I've got to interview not just academics and translators and experts on Stoicism, but also Olympic athletes and political leaders, military leaders, business leaders, people who have taken these ideas from the Stoics and run them through the laboratory of human experience, to borrow Admiral James Stockdale's phrase. So that's what we're going to talk about in today's episode, lessons I've learned about Stoic philosophy through the Daily Stoic podcast.
When the mind and the body kind of, when you find that kind of sweet spot where they both kind of work together, then you really have a big advantage. Because the mind is just like Freddie Gerstle was saying when I was a kid, it needs the same kind of torture. It needs the same pain. It needs the same kind of a push and resistance, and the more adversity that you go through, the stronger you get as a character, the stronger your character becomes, and the stronger your will becomes, and all of that stuff. So it's very clear. I believe in that very strongly, and I've always practiced that.
One of the Stoics said, we treat the body rigorously so that it's not disobedient to the mind. And I think it's the idea that we're sort of cultivating this. When we feel that resistance, when we feel that doubt, when our body says, no, you can't run 2 more miles or you can't do 2 more reps, and you push through that, that's what you need. Like when you're trying to pass redistricting and you fail the first time and you fail the second, like you need that part of yourself that has trained the muscle that pushes past no or the first failure or that it's hard. You have to cultivate that sort of meta muscle that pushes through hard stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I sometimes try to make it simpler. And what I'm talking about is that the rule is don't think. And so because I feel like a lot of people, when they get up, their mind starts wandering. It's a natural thing. We all do that.
Overthinking.
But if you make it a rule where you say, okay, there's certain things that I would do before I start thinking, and that is, I'm going to work out for an hour. So now if the mind tells you, the day is okay. I mean, what the hell is Sunday? And no one will know. I mean, let's just go and have some pancakes instead, and it's just to kind of reorganize you a little bit. You say, wait a minute. What did I just do? I thought. And I promised myself I'm not going to think. So it's the thinking that makes me want to go and change my mind. If I stop that thinking and throw it out and do exactly what I set out to do, which is to do first of all 1 hour workout. So that's my idea. Let's just go, let's get on that bicycle. Let's bicycle down to the gym. Because as soon as you bicycle, everything starts feeling good. It's almost kind of like you start out the first mile with a black and white picture. And then all of a sudden this picture turns more and more colorful. By the time you get to the gym and you do the first set, it's colorful. The gym is colorful. The characters around you are colorful. Everyone, is there working out, and you get sucked into it, and you start training harder and harder and all that stuff. And then by the time you bicycle home and you have breakfast, you feel really good. So this is always the same thing. So don't let your thinking get in the way. That's what I always tell people. People get thrown off when you say don't think. They say, what do you mean don't think? I thought that I should think. Yeah, is it at the right moment?
Yes.
You have to think, of course, in the right moment. But in the morning when you get up and you have time, do the workout before I start thinking.
Yes.
Just step out of bed, just go on your life cycle. If you have a stationary bike at home, if you don't, to go out and ride the bicycle. If you don't have a bicycle, then and you're in the snow country, then you just walk in the deep snow and you get some exercise. We don't need much money in order to really make your body kind of go through some kind of pain, and to just really push it a little bit, burn the calories, get the steps in there, work the heart and everything like this, and you will feel good. And that's the key thing people should always know. When you if you feel good physically and you can do wonderful things physically, then you feel mentally much better about yourself.
Yeah, in the morning, you don't want to get sucked into the phone. You don't want to get sucked into turning on the TV, seeing what's happening on the news. Get moving,
that's right.
Get active.
That's right.
And I love that feeling right before the sweat starts.
Yeah.
Like where you're breaking through some barrier from non-activity to activity. And then you've already won the day.
Right. So that's I think that we feel better if you feel good physically, then you feel good mentally and psychologically. And if you feel good mentally and you feel good about yourself because you've now done something, you look at the world quite differently.
Yeah.
You don't drive around in traffic angry. It spills over. All of a sudden, I feel like so good that even if someone is in the wrong and I drive home with my bicycle and someone runs in front of me and almost wipes me out,
and
they say, "Oh, I'm so sorry." I'm saying, No, you go ahead. Go across this. No, it's green for you. No, you go ahead. I say, and I say, Jesus, I don't think I would have been like that when I started the bike ride. It's exactly. It's really interesting how we approach everything and how friendly we are, how happy we are, how good we feel about ourselves, and how this rubs off on other people and so on. So that's why I always, because I'm addicted to exercising. People always say you have so much discipline, Arnold. I tell them, I said, to be very honest with you, I don't have much discipline. I really don't. I think I'm just addicted. I just got sucked into this world, and I just can't do it without it. And that's that simple. So there's certain things that that feels good. You just want to do it over and over again, and without ever asking about it, should I or shouldn't I? So it doesn't take much discipline for me.
In some respects, it almost takes more discipline when you're like that. So let's say you're injured, or you're not feeling well, or you're working to go, today's a rest day.
Right.
Or I have to be careful with my knee.
Yeah.
It almost takes more discipline. You have to be disciplined about your discipline.
Oh, yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, I go through this right now. I had surgery last week on my elbow because I had a nerve that all of a sudden created numbness on my little finger, on my hand. And it was because of bone spurs, and there was a muscle that was kind of pressing against the nerve so they had to relocate the nerve. But of course, what did they say? Don't exercise, don't go to the gym until you come back and you get the stitches taken out. So this morning they took the stitches out. So now I feel really good and happy that I can go back to the gym and do something.
Yes.
So it's because it was really, I needed discipline to stay away from the gym.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, the idea of temperance, right? The middle ground. If you're so extra about something, you actually need the discipline to rein it in, or you burn out, you hurt yourself, you're not responsible. That can be harder.
Yes.
So you talked in the book, I thought it was interesting. You're saying you see people in the gym and they're like, I just want to get in shape. And you say, but sort of for what or how, right? You're sort of you're forcing them to be specific. This idea of being useful, I think, how would you push people in that direction too, right? So maybe generally, there's very few people that don't want to be useful. We all, I think, inherently want to be useful, but how do we channel that? Or how does a person find their reason or their canvas to be useful?
Well, I think that first of all, the most important thing is what you just said, to have a clear vision and a clear goal.
Yeah.
Because when you ask someone in the gym, okay, you want to be in shape, what is the reason why you want to be in shape? Because being in shape, it's just very broad. What does that mean? And how do you get motivated if you don't have a specific goal?
Yeah.
So then get into this conversation where people then have to really start thinking about. And some people say, well, the doctor told me that I'm now 55 years old, my cholesterol is high, and my blood pressure is high, and they thought that instead of just going on drugs and prescribing me medication, I should try vigorous exercising every day for a little bit, not too long, but just every day something. And so they do that. But I always tell them, I said, look, if there's a specific goal that you have where you say, okay, by Christmas, I want to have 20 pounds less. Now you're shooting for a specific goal, and now you weigh yourself every day. Now you watch what you eat, because you always know that you're stepping on this scale, and you want to weigh less and less and less every day. And by Christmas, you want to have 20 pounds less. So you can afford a little bit pigging out, right, at Christmas time or whatever, because maybe you feel overweight or whatever. So when we set specific goals like that, or I sometimes talk about it that when I was a kid, 15 years old, I wanted to go the next year to the lake where I grew up, and I wanted to be more muscular and impress the girls. And people say, you were actually saying that? I said, no, I was not saying that to anybody. I said, but it was my goal, and I dealt with it.
Sure.
I said, I dealt with it, and it motivated me to go and to train every day and all this. I said, and it's of course a stupid motivation, but it works.
Yeah.
I said, so I'm telling people, I said, no matter how stupid your motivation is, it doesn't matter. How silly it is, it doesn't matter. But pick a goal and then go after that goal. Have a specific reason for it, because for everything, it gives us more motivation when we have a reason. It's no different than a kid that is coming out of high school and he now goes to college and he wants to be a doctor. Well, that's a goal.
Yeah.
Well, that's a big goal. And now all his classes that he would take will be specific classes that will get him to that goal, to make that goal a reality. There's so many that go to university just because they hear always this, oh, this is the American way, you got to have a university, you have to have a degree and all this stuff. But they don't know for what.
Right.
So they go in there, and what do? They go and they join the university, they go and stay in some frat house, and they get drunk, they eat junk food, they gain weight and all this, and they're drunk more than they're really studying and all this stuff. So because they are aimlessly kind of like going through university for it, and then they're finished and they don't earn more money because they haven't really shot it. They study American history or something that's that they will not use later on, except if you become an educator of some sort, then you can use those things, or psychology they study, or English they study. Yeah, we can use this, but if it has to be used for something specifically. So I think it's always good if you say, I want to be a businessman. I want to start a real estate business. And so therefore, all of this that you study is like you study the microeconomics and macroeconomics, you study accounting, you get really good in math and in algebra and geometry, and all of those kind of things, and you really get good in writing business letters and in communicating and in marketing and in publicizing products and all of this stuff. So all of the stuff that is important to be a good businessman, because no matter what business you're in, you have to be able to sell, to market, to communicate the product, whatever you're dealing with. So then you can take classes for that.
Yes.
So this is why it's more fun when we have a goal. And this is why I stress this in my book about have a vision, have a clear goal. Like I had when I was 15 years old, I wanted to be the world champion in bodybuilding. I wanted to be another Reg Park. And 5 years later, after that dream and that vision that I had, 5 years later, I was standing on that very same stage in London where Reg Park won his Mr. Universe contest in 1951, in 1958, and in 1965. He won 3 Mr. Universe titles. And on that very same stage, I stood there in 1966. And then in 1967, I won the Mr. Universe title on that stage. So I saw firsthand how that vision drove me to the gym hours a day, where the normal amateur bodybuilder didn't train 3-4 hours a day. They trained an hour and a half. But I did the weightlifting, I did the powerlifting, I did the bodybuilding, I did the reps and the heavyweights and everything like this. And then by the time, after hours and hours of training and torturing myself and going through this, I started winning competitions and Junior Mr. Europe, then Mr. Europe. best built man of Europe, and then second Mr. Universe, then Mr. Universe with the age of 20. So it was amazing. So now I knew, this is what I have to do for the rest of my life. I have to have a very clear vision. And so then, of course, your vision expands. You say, I want to be not just Mr. Universe, I got to go and become the greatest bodybuilder of all times. So that becomes your new goal, that I have to win that many Mr. Universe titles as Reg Park win. I have to win as many Mr. Olympia titles as Sergio Oliva and Larry Scott won. And so I have to just go after those titles. And so eventually I became the greatest bodybuilder of all times. In 1975, after winning the 6th, in 1980, the 7th Mr. Olympia competition and the 13th World Bodybuilding title. And so it was like, and with that same idea went into acting. Yeah. Again, I had a very clear vision to become another Clint Eastwood or Charles Bronson or something like this. So every one of my goals I approached that way.
What I love about your work, and I'm curious how you think about it, is that so you're very eclectic in the philosophies and the philosophers that you pick from. One day you have a column about the advice of Epicurus, then it's the Stoics, then it's Schopenhauer.
You actually read my column.
Of course, I love. Well,
Brian Holiday reads my column.
Everyone reads your columns. It's like the most read column in the history of the Atlantic, I'm sure. And that's a pretty long tradition, right? I mean, you're up there with Emerson and Whitman and Thoreau. It's great. But I just like that you sort of, it seems like what I make up is that you wake up and you go, what can I learn from a school I don't know that much about today? Right. Or what do these people have to tell us about this? Which I think is different than how a lot of people think about it, which is they go, I am this. Right. Like, I believe this. And you seem to be willing to take from anyone and anything that has something to teach you.
Yeah, this is one of the... So I left academia. I was actually a French horn player for the first 12 years of my career. But then, went to graduate school, became an academic, did very conventional academic work. I was writing academic journal articles for huge audiences of 14, 15 readers, yes. Doing stuff of, highly mathematical work, quite esoteric. And then I went and I ran a think tank for a long time. And as I was in the think tank, I was thinking, what do I wish I could do? And the answer is, I wish I could actually look at the whole world and take what's best to ask the questions and answer them using all these different traditions. And I've formulated this theory of the case that basically says all the most interesting questions in life, they come from the theologians, philosophers, historians, and artists. Yeah. That's where the really interesting questions come from. They don't come from social scientists like me. Yeah. Social scientists say, I could answer that question, which maybe nobody's ever asked, because I have good data to answer it. That's the wrong place to start the story, right? Look at where the interesting questions are. Then expose them to the, the mechanism of causation, which usually comes from biology, and so because psychology is biology, is really what it is. And so you have to understand the neuroscience in my field. Then the social science comes in. Then the social science says, we've done a bunch of experiments. Is this right? Was Seneca right? Yeah, he usually was. And
surprisingly so, yes.
Yeah. And then last but not least, how do you use it? Yeah. How do you use it? And so it's a 4-step process again and again and again. It's philosophy, neuroscience, social science, management, self-management. And that's really where it comes from. So you have to listen. So I'm listening, but you also have to read widely. And it's a thrill. Yeah. It's unbelievable. Every place you look, there's a column. Every place you look, there's an idea. Yeah. Everybody's philosophy and theology, and so I study a lot of world religions, and I go to India a lot. With my lab, we're going in April to see the Dalai Lama and do a conference with the Dalai Lama, which is great. And I'm going to meditate with the Tibetan Buddhist monks, and outside of my tradition. But the whole point is, it's outside my tradition.
Yeah, that's lovely. The idea of thinking outside your tradition, because otherwise you're dogmatic or fundamentalist, and you're needlessly blinkering yourself to what other people have explored or understood. My favorite quote's from Seneca. He says, I'll quote a bad author if the line is good. And then he says, not that everyone from a different school is a bad author, but his point is I'll take from anyone. And he says, and actually that's the whole point. You have to read like a spy in the enemy's camp. Yeah. Which is like, which you see him do, because in his letters to Lucilius, the philosopher he quotes the most is Epicurus. He's not quoting Zeno or Chrysippus or Cleanthes or Cicero. He's quoting the person who he's supposedly diametrically opposed to, but he's so intimately familiar with that guy's work. And he's not quoting all the areas that they disagree. He's quoting the areas that they agree, that he says, oh, that's actually great. It doesn't come from a source like from my religion or from my philosophy, but that doesn't mean it's wrong.
Right.
And I'm going to celebrate that, and I'm going to share that with you.
That's actually the secret to our world,
yes.
quite frankly. And there's a really interesting example of that I got just from one of my students. So I just finished my class at HBS yesterday on leadership and happiness, which is a big science of happiness seminar. I have 2 sections of 90 MBA students and a really long waiting list of people who want to get into this science of happiness class. It's because it's super fun and really interesting, and there's a lot of science in it. But it's always based on these philosophical principles. And we were talking about, there's a whole lecture that we do on finding your purpose. How do you find your purpose? And it starts with this whole idea of essence and existence.
Yeah.
And that dichotomy in philosophy is super interesting. What comes first, your existence or your essence? Do you have to discover your meaning, or do you have to invent your meaning?
Okay.
So the existentialists say that it doesn't exist and you have to invent it.
Yeah.
Right?
You have to make up a reason to get out of bed every morning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the Stoics would say it already existed and you got to find it.
Yeah.
Right? And Christians and the Jewish philosophers and the Muslims, everybody up until the existentialists. And the nihilists say there is no meaning, so stop trying.
Yeah.
Right? So Nietzsche would say that. Okay, so I'm lecturing on that. And a student really astutely says, well, so a modern thinker on this, of course, is Viktor Frankl.
Yes.
Who's all about finding meaning and purpose.
Yes.
And he quotes in his most famous book, Man's Search for Meaning, which everybody who listens to this podcast has read Man's Search for Meaning. Incredible
My
book.
aunt gave me that book when I graduated from high school, and it may be the greatest present that I've ever gotten.
Incredible, because it changes your life.
Yes.
And he starts that book by quoting Nietzsche. This is weird, right?
Yes.
I mean, the father of nihilism, at least as we understand it.
Yeah.
And he quotes it with this very famous quote from Nietzsche that says, a man who understands his why can endure any how.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, and you think, and one of my students says, Professor, what's the dealio? I mean, it's like, so Viktor Frankl quotes Nietzsche to motivate his own work about looking for the why of your life. Why, to quote our friend Simon Sinek.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. But wasn't he a nihilist who didn't believe that there is a why? And I'm like, So you go back and you look at it, and another one of my students, I said, I think it's got to be a misquote. It wasn't. It turns out that he says, a man who understands his why can endure any how. And then he goes on to say, no one cares about happiness except the English. It's just a weird aphorism.
Yeah.
He's clearly derisive about the idea.
Yeah.
He believes there isn't a why. But if you're going to be deluded enough to finding it, then you'll be able to get through life. That's his point. Yeah. And that's a very Nietzschean point. That's even more depressing, is the whole point. There is no why, but, knock yourself out, is what he's saying. Viktor Frankl says, I'll take that first part, just like Seneca. Right? So I'll take that first part, and I'm going to understand it non-ironically, and I do believe there is a why, and I am going to endure anyhow, and you're going to be able to as well. And he's saved millions of people from misery.
Look, I started off writing green the first 2 weeks. I was trying to write impressively.
Yeah.
I remember going back and going, woo. Nice turn of phrase. Woo.
Yeah.
Let's do more.
Yeah.
For 2 weeks, I went on. And then I got to the 2 week period. It gained a little confidence that I had some goods to share, worth sharing. And then looked at my stuff and I was like, that's bullshit, bro. Yeah. You're waxing the car, man.
Yeah.
The engine. Let's talk about the engine and the oil, and you're waxing the car.
Right.
And I was like, that's good wax, but it's bullshit.
Yeah.
Compared to what the honest truth is. So then got the confidence to go, dude, don't write impressively. If you write it well and honestly, it may be impressive.
Yes.
But don't write impressively. And that first 2 weeks, I was trying to write impressively. And it was superfluous shit, too many adverbs and kind of stuff that I was like, oh, that's a nice turn. But I was like, yeah, but you're patting the back of the you're not
Yes.
you're not coming from the inside out. It's coming from the outside
gilding
in.
the lily or whatever. Yeah, you're acting the part rather than being the part.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if Marcus Aurelius had sat down to write a work of philosophy, I'm sure he could have done it because he's clearly a talented writer. And I'm sure there are a lot of philosophical things you could say. And maybe even we would sit down and talk about it because lots of ancient philosophy has survived. But there's something uniquely personal and raw and real about it. And I think that the best art is that. There isn't that element of performativeness. There is something stripped down about it.
It's, I think a way I say it that's similar, and I know that me personally, my greatest successes, and I don't mean like most, but just the most qualitative successes I've had in life, are when I'm not asking permission. Not in any anti way.
Yeah.
Just, no, I'm not apologizing. There's nothing to apologize for. I'm not apologizing, and I'm not asking permission.
Yeah.
But to get, and not to go like, I don't think I need it. No, that's one step away. No, I'm not asking permission.
Yeah.
Not, I don't think I should ask permission. No, you're not there yet. If you're going, I don't think I should ask, that's already two sort of, gilding the lid to get to sound. No, I'm not asking permission. And almost like, not even being able to say it out loud, but just knowing it. No, there's no permission going to be asked from me on this.
Because you're gonna do it anyway. You don't care.
And then you're like, you're thrown into isolation and self-reliance, and it goes a little bit deeper because you don't have the attaboys or way to goes or the soft landings, and you're like, dude, it's me on me right now. Here we go. And that's just a hell of a charge. I mean, a good charge.
Yeah, sure.
Of stimulation and if you can get in that subjective place.
Yeah.
To where you're not even. I think I'm always aware. When I said earlier, like, know your zone, I'm aware. Like I said, I pop into that objective spot and go, I think I kind of know. Like I had I don't know if I ever showed him. I wrote reviews for this book before it came out.
The blurbs or like a New York Times style review?
No, I wrote reviews that I put in the words of other people's mouth.
Okay.
And I have them, and I was going to put them in the book, and it was going to be a comedic twist. If 90% through the way through it, you were going to get to all these reviews, and you're like, wait, the book just came out. And I've got them, and they're funny. They're pretty spot on.
Interesting.
About what people that did review the book actually said about the book. So I was popping out into awareness going, what would so-and-so say of this book?
There's something to that. Like Amazon used to have this thing where, maybe they still do, but Amazon had this thing where if you wanted to like launch a product, you had to write the press release first. So like imagine that it's existed. Yeah. You've gotten all the way to the end. You're writing the thing describing. So you're having to think in advance.
Yeah.
Like, because you don't write your own press release. The marketing department is sitting down and write the press release. What are they able to say about this thing? And if it's not exciting, then you've failed. And so let's start from what needs to be exciting and in there at the beginning. Right. And I think that's that kind of objectivity rather than, because like oftentimes as a creative person, you get really excited. There's all the things that are exciting and interesting to me. And then there's where it overlaps with what the audience, with what people might be interested in. And the ideal projects are where those two things overlap. Right. That's where you get something explosive. And so you got to have the objectivity to know, hey, is this a thing that like just I'm interested in? Right. Or is this a thing that like has a wider resonance outside me? Yeah. And look, if it was only going to take an afternoon, just do the thing that's interesting to you. But if you're going to spend 5 years of your life on something, it's got to have some...
Nice to check in on supply and demand.
Exactly.
I do this with movies before I get started. I'll go sit down with the director and producer and I was like, for shits and giggles, man, what's the poster?
Yeah.
We hadn't shot it. We hadn't started shooting. What's the poster?
So many of my ideas around parenting, right, to give some background, actually came from all the work I was doing in private practice with adults, young adults, older adults, and started to see these patterns. It's like, okay, kind of the things I knew about their early years, the struggles they had in adulthood. And it allowed me to wonder, like, well, what happened here? And what kinds of things might have led to different outcomes? And what will help these adults kind of rewire in a way that helps them live in a way that's more in line with their values? And what if we reverse engineer that information to parents today so you can just start out? And I think this was a big part of it. This, like, what is resilience versus happiness? And, a lot of these ideas, came from working with this set, honestly, for a period of my private practice. I was seeing like all these late 20-year-olds, let's say, who, like, all of them, and I'm in New York City, so there was a little bit of homogeneity to their stories. Sure. Like they went to some, they went to Harvard, they went to Yale, they went to, whatever college, the college. Okay. Then they graduated top of their class. then they got a job as, I don't know, an investment banker. Like, they kind of like checked these boxes of these things that are external markers of success, supposedly maybe make people happy, right? And then they were like all 28, and they came to me in my private practice. None of them knew each other. It's just this collection of, people feeling completely empty, completely unable to function in like really adult life. They didn't find relationships that were meaningful. And they were really, really lost. And even would say to me, like, that they felt very fragile, right? And I was like, wow, there's this huge gap. What is this? And when I started to do some like data collection, okay, well, where did this come from? Let's figure this out. I really did hear remarkably similar stories about their childhood. And they'd say to me, like, I know I'm supposed to say in therapy, like, my parents messed me up. They're really uninvolved. That's not my story. Like, my parents are always there. I felt so loved by them. I felt so supported by them. And then I, kept doing some digging. And a lot of the things I heard was that happiness was a real goal for their parents in raising them. Like happiness as a goal in childhood. And I know people hear that, they're like, okay, sorry, what's the problem? Like, we want our kids to be happy. What's wrong with that? But if I give some examples, right? Like, okay, didn't make the soccer team in my town. Okay, like and I remember this, this guy said, my dad worked 1 million hours a week. He came home early that day. He found another soccer team. He drove me 2 days later to the tryout. He was coming home from work early. He was driving me 45 minutes to be on a different soccer team, right? Or, I was crying that I didn't get the thing I wanted at the toy store. And yes, then my parents found it immediately online somewhere else. And it was at my house 2 days later, right? And like, they always wanted me to be happy. And then I kind of had this aha moment of like, okay, wait. So what happens in childhood when we kind of really orient toward our kids' happiness is any moment where our kid has intense distress, we believe we have to exit them out of distress and enter them into happiness. And so what's happening in their body is I feel frustrated or sad or let down or less than. All feelings we all feel throughout our lives. There's no way out of those feelings. And what their body is learning is when I have that feeling turn on, I then have next to that the expectation of that feeling turning off and happiness turning on. And if I fast forward to adulthood, I just think that's a really hard expectation. And like, I think most of us know in adulthood, when you get fired from a job, which can happen to anyone, like usually the next day, you don't turn that feeling off and, turn the happiness of a new job on, right? Or when you, I don't know, anything, even small, like I'm in traffic. Well, guess what? The best thing to do when you're in traffic is cope with traffic. Like there's no immediate exit, right? To not traffic. And so what I saw was a real inability to cope with anything distressing, and almost an expectation that happiness should be around the corner, which leads people feeling very paralyzed. And actually what we were saying earlier, Ryan, totally unable to feel capable in a time of stress because they were never taught to tolerate stress.
Well, it's like if your definition of happiness is everything going the way that you want it to go, you will be happy if you are lucky enough to live in a world where more often than not, everything goes the way that you want it to go. And sometimes you're lucky enough to be that person, or you're lucky enough to be that person for a long time, but everything regresses towards the mean, And so a better definition of happiness, I think, is the ability to adjust and adapt and accommodate, the fact that the vast majority of things are outside of your control. So that word acceptance, which is not a popular word these days, or has an almost immediate, negative connotation for people, is probably one of the more important characteristics of a happy person. But we train people to fight against that idea.
Yeah. And I think as parents, it can be very relieving to say, like, I don't need to be the architect of my kids' happiness, when they're young. In fact, I often think with my own kids, like, of course, I'm always going to be in their lives and want to be very involved. But at the same time, I think to some degree, I'm working myself out of a job. Like, I will be very proud if my kid calls me from college and says, this not so great thing happened. It really stunk. And like, okay, here's what I did. And here's where I am now. Like, wow, look at that. Right. And so if we want our kids to feel capable when they're frustrated and learn that, sometimes things in life don't go well, we have to help them build that circuitry, which is basically the complete opposite of having an immediate exit into ease or contentment.
I lost this wife of 60 years, and
I'm so sorry.
It's sort of devastating. But there was a Marcus Aurelius quote that really lifted me, which was if you lose, I don't know it literally, but you'll know it. If you lose a loved one, honor her, and in a sense try to be more like her, and then she'll live in your actions. And so my wife was very good, and I just try to be like her. And when I try to be like her, I like she was if someone was alone or sick or something, she'd call them up and be comforting to them. And I'm not like that, So I started to do that. People that I know, some guys my age who have no grandchildren, are just there, and call them up and say, how are you? And being like her.
Yeah.
And they were so pleased and said, oh, it's so kind. And so I keep my wife in my life with Marcus Aurelius' advice by trying to be more like her.
I find that absolutely beautiful. Oh man, that's
it is.
You know that Aeschylus quote you just mentioned. I was just writing about this last week because did you know that the night that RFK found out that Martin Luther King had been assassinated, he was giving a speech in Indianapolis in a black neighborhood, and he could feel a riot coming on, and he quoted that speech to them, and he spoke about his own loss of his brother. And that was one of the few cities in America that didn't riot. And so again, these ideas from the classics coming right back to modern life and being of use. It's such an incredibly wonderful and important tradition, I think.
Well, someone sent me that quote when I lost my son, and it was the only quote that I understood emotionally. That ultimately it drops on you, drop by drop, until by the awful grace of God comes wisdom or something, whatever came.
Yeah, I think before that, Sophocles or Aeschylus says, we suffer unto truth. That's the only way that we learn the important things about life and about existence.
We suffer into truth. How beautiful.
So to talk about your early career, because I think there's two moments that really stuck out at me that I thought were interesting. You tell the story of the frog float that you're supposed to make, which you thought was this sort of humiliating bit of busy work. And what's the advice that because I think we find ourselves in those positions. We get tasked with something. We're like, this is the worst thing you could ask me to do. I hate this. This is beneath me. And what did they tell you?
Well, so this is, it was at my first SEAL command. I was a brand new ensign, and I remember the day it happened. I'm out at some training exercise in San Diego. So this all happened in San Diego, and in San Diego Bay. And some petty officer comes running up to me and says, "Hey, sir, the commanding officer wants to see you." Yeah. Well, I'm an ensign. The commanding officer, he's the big guy, right? I didn't even know if he knew who I was. I'd only been at the command a couple of weeks. And I'm thinking, well, this is it. This is why I went through SEAL training. I'm going to go do a mission into Vladivostok to get the Soviets, or we're going to go back to Vietnam and rescue the POWs. We're going to go do something, right? So I rush across. I had to go across the base and get to my headquarters, and I go in to see my commanding officer, and I pop to, and he's the guy's name was Bill Salisbury, terrific guy, Vietnam vet, highly decorated, and he says, "Well, Mr. McRaven," says, "I've been hearing good things about you." I'm thinking, yeah, you have. He says, I've been talking to the chief petty officers, and they say you're the best ensign in the team. I'm like, that's great here. And then it occurred to me, I think I was the only ensign in the team. And then he says, the Commodore called me. Well, the Commodore was his boss. I'm thinking, wow, the Commodore, and this is a big guy. This has got to be something important. And he says, the 4th of July is coming up. And I'm thinking, okay, what does that have to do with Vladivostok? And he said, well, every year the city of Coronado has a parade. And now I'm really thrown off. I'm not sure what the heck we're talking about. And he says, so we need to build a frog float, for frogmen. And we have the frog float. And of course I'm like, and he says, hey, well, we'll go talk to the supply officer and he'll get you all the gear you need and go build that frog float. You're in charge of the frog float. So to your point, I go back to the locker room and I'm muttering under my breath and this crusty old Master Chief. So again, senior SEAL, a guy named Herschel Davis, comes up to me and he says, "What's wrong, Ensign?" I said, "Nothing, Master Chief." He goes, "No, what's wrong?" I said, "No." He goes, "Come on." I said, "Well, finally I confessed." I said, "Well, sir," I said, "Master Chief, the commanding officer just called me in and he wants me to build a frog float for the 4th of July parade." I remember the Master Chief says, "And I bet you thought you were going to be jumping out of airplanes, blowing things up, and saving the world." I said, "Yeah, I did." And he goes, "Well, let me tell you something, Ensign." He says, "I've been in this canoe club for 30 years. And if the skipper wants you to build a frog float, then you build the best damn frog float you can." And that was it. It was the best advice I ever had. You build the best damn frog float. You know, we all get these jobs, as you said, Ryan. We all get these jobs that we think are beneath our status.
Yeah.
But if you take the jobs on and you do it well, one, people will think that you're good enough to do the next job and the bigger job. But I think you also have a responsibility. When somebody gives you a job, do it the best you can.
Yeah.
And so throughout the course of my career, I kind of had to build a lot of frog floats. And I always tried to do the best I could no matter what the job was. And I think that put me in a position where people said, you know, every time we give McRaven a job that, oh, by the way, most people don't want, he does a good job.
Yeah.
And so let's give him this next big job here.
When I read that story, I thought of this story from ancient Greece. There was this sort of promising, up-and-coming, young man, and so he threatens the powers that be. So they go, how do we sort of get rid of this guy? They were like, how do we, what now? Like, how do we send him to Alaska or something, right? And so they banish him to this position, or they promote him to this position. He has to manage like the city's sewers, which is supposed to be gross. It's supposed to be horrible. He's supposed to quit in disgust. It's supposed to be shameful. It's like a backwater that's supposed to kill his career. And instead he becomes like the best damn sewer guy in the history of Athens, and he cleans it up, and it becomes this, not just a position of honor, but it becomes now a position that people aspire to because it becomes the launching point for his career. And Plutarch says the lesson of this is that we bring dignity and honor to the position, rather than the position bring dignity and honor to us, which is so, we think we want the important, powerful, fancy thing, as opposed to understanding that we have within us the ability to turn making the frog float or whatever into something of meaning and purpose. And that's ultimately what happens, right? You did a pretty good job.
Yeah, it worked out okay.
Look, when you love what you do, sometimes you forget to eat. This is something Mark Aurelius actually talks about in Meditations. I always find that lunch sneaks up on me. And that's actually where today's sponsor comes in. Huel. Their Black Edition ready to drink is a complete meal in a bottle. It's high in protein, low in sugar, and it tastes good. You can find Huel at GNC on Amazon. You can go directly to Huel.com. And new customers shopping at Huel.com get 15% off, plus a free gift using the code DailyStoic. Huel is a perfectly balanced meal. It takes the guesswork out of healthy eating. And as I said, it tastes pretty good. It's got 35 grams of protein, 27 vitamins and minerals, all in one bottle. It's the perfect solution when you're on the move, when you're busy, when you got kids, when you're writing, when you love what you do. Try Huel and you get 15% off now, plus a free gift for new customers with code DailyStoic when you go to Huel.com. Start the year off strong with Huel. How was India?
India was incredible.
What'd you do?
It was a life-changing trip in certain ways. So Arthur Brooks, who you know well and your audience knows well, invited me and my wife to join a small group of people to travel with him to Dharamshala to spend a couple days in talks with the Dalai Lama, which was an opportunity that was a hell yes. Like, sure. I'm not going to say no to that. Like, I don't think that ask is going to, come along again anytime soon. So we went, and it was really quite something. I mean, the Dalai Lama is 89 years old, and, who knows, he may live to 110, but he's getting up there, and I don't know how many more years he's going to be able to do this kind of thing. And Arthur's been visiting with him for over a decade. He's gone many, many times. And this was sort of a Harvard-sponsored thing with his happiness lab. So there was a bunch of people that he works with associated with Harvard. and then some social scientists. Rainn Wilson came as well.
Oh, really?
Which was
I was
cool.
just messaging him the other day.
Yeah. And Lisa Miller, who teaches the science of spirituality at Columbia, who's been on my podcast. She's wonderful. So it was an interesting group of people. And Arthur was quick to say at the outset that no matter how planned out like this arc of conversation, he could kind of like, imagine that no matter what question you ask the Dalai Lama, he's just going to impart whatever wisdom he feels like this group needs to hear.
Oh, interesting.
Which was exactly the case. Like, Arthur comes armed with a whole sense of trajectory where he wants to take this. It's about transcendence. It's about love, the happiness, the things he talks about. But essentially, the answer every time was some version of love. Like, no matter what eludes you or what aspect of your life feels unfulfilled, the answers that you seek will always be found by exploring the nature of love. And
giving or receiving?
Both. Just love in its like broadest definition, I suppose. And he kept using the metaphor of looking at a mother's love for a child. Like, if you struggle to conceptualize or grasp what I'm talking about when I say love, just look to the mother's love of a child, or look at an animal's love for its child, like the animal mother, like the cow or the dog or what have you. That was sort of the repeated refrain over the course of the 2 days, which on one level is like very reductive and simplistic, but if you kind of step back, is actually perhaps the most profound thing that he could share. Like,
so you would just ask a question and then he would just be like, well, what you actually need to be asking me about
and what was great is that he actually spoke in his native tongue, and he had his longtime translator with him. So he didn't have to struggle with any kind of like language barrier.
Yeah.
And there was more to it. And I'm actually in the process of trying to get a transcript, because I really want to be able to revisit it and read it and kind of mine it for the deeper truths. But, I was sitting this far away from him, for 2 days, and it was conducted in his monastery in this like sort of greeting room that is connected to his residence. And, Dharamshala is a pretty special place. I mean, it's just littered with seekers from all over the world, backpackers. It's sort of a Topanga of India, nestled up against the foothills that lead up to the Himalayas. And
what's his energy like? Like, what do you feel like?
You do
when
feel
you meet
it,
someone who has like real charisma or power, you're like, oh, there's something here.
For sure. I mean, he is, and Arthur said this, it's like, it's a rare opportunity to spend time with a living bodhisattva. Like, on some level, he is the world's most prominent and perhaps greatest spiritual leader. And when you reflect on his life and the level of advocacy and compassion that he's brought to very difficult circumstances with his people, it's quite profound. So in the aftermath of that experience, we got to visit this kind of adjunct museum where you can see all the artifacts that he's collected over the course of his life, all the honorary degrees from all these American universities, and just incredible photographs of him with like every world leader.
Sure.
Including this remarkable photograph of him engaging with Chairman Mao, who was basically responsible for slaughtering, untold millions of his people, and is responsible for his exile, etc. But I think the real gift also was the opportunity to spend time with so many of his monks, all these Tibetan monks, who are some of the most joyful, fun, and engaging people like I've ever met. Like, they're just so happy. And a lot of them have been educated in the United States. Most of them fled from Tibet when they were kids, and now kind of reside in monasteries across India, many of them in southern India, who traveled up for this event. And getting to kind of probe their minds and their kind of philosophy of life was pretty cool, because most of them speak pretty good English as well.
Well, there's good and bad versions of popular Stoicism, right? And so I think it's a mistake to go to either extreme and say all popular Stoicism is fine,
Sure.
or all popular Stoicism is just awful and toxic.
Yeah.
There's a mixture, right? Like, same with anything, right? CBT, most of the, like not all the criticisms, but many of the criticisms of Stoicism were made to a far lesser extent previously against CBT. For a long time, people said CBT is just in your head. It doesn't deal with the emotions. You know, it's overly rational, appeals more to men, yada, yada, yada. Like Albert Ellis got hammered with those criticisms. And then it, like a lot of times when the criticisms don't have that much, it just died off slowly over time. And those voices kind of faded away. But now they kind of target Stoicism with that criticism because there's good and bad versions. I've read books on, I mean, maybe I'm pretty easygoing about books and popular books on Stoicism, but I have read ones that I really thought were awful. There's one in particular where the guy that wrote it sounds like he says stuff that over and over and over throughout the book sounds like the kind of stuff that a school shooter would put in their manifesto.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Like, it's extreme. You know, to put it more kind of objectively, if I was still working in the NHS or a kind of institution like that, and a client showed me that, I'd have to red flag it.
Yeah.
Like, as a potential risk factor for this guy saying stuff that sounds very threatening. Like, and he's clearly unstable, he's clearly paranoid, and he's talking about practicing with guns and other weapons, you know, and thinking about killing people.
Yeah.
You know, in a self-improvement book on Stoicism.
Yeah, Stoicism is not supposed to turn your heart to stone. It's supposed to mean you're not overwhelmed by your emotions. You're not this walking open wound. But I mean, when I think of the circles of Hierocles, I think about someone who's actually working quite hard to care about as many people as possible.
Yeah, the Stoic ideal, I mean, it's a little bit like we mentioned the Bodhisattva ideal in Mahayana Buddhism earlier. Like, the Stoic goal isn't to be, you know, not care about anyone. It's the opposite. It's kindness is a virtue in Stoicism, like Buddhist compassion in a way. You know,
at the beginning of Meditations, Marcus Aurelius talks about one of his teachers taught him to be free of passion, but full of love. I think that's lovely.
Yeah, philostorgia, which is like family love, paternal love. It's actually, they're thinking in part of the love of Zeus for mankind, right, his children, and they want to emulate Zeus. So they think, well, how could you become more, you know, one of the themes in Stoicism, the theological aspect, is to emulate God. Like, Zeus is this perfect mind, so we should try and become as much like that as we can, despite, you know, the limitations of us being mortal. So, you know, how does Zeus feel about mankind? Well, we're all his children. Like, I mean, that sounds Christian, but that's how Marcus and the Stoics view Zeus. Like, that he has this kind of affection. Zeus is the god of friendship and xenia, like hospitality, in Greek culture. So this is a theme that runs through Stoicism that I think is often overlooked, like you say. And so in these, there is toxic, bad Stoicism out there. Andrew Tate did a video where he talks about Marcus Aurelius, and so they're definitely, like, some of these guys are definitely associating with capital S Stoicism.
Yeah.
But what they're talking about is lowercase Stoicism, which, you know, is like a hot potato or whatever in the field of therapy. Because, I mean, very simply, I've said this a million times, but I guess one of the main things that I'd say from my perspective as a former psychotherapist is that there's a significant body of research that shows that lowercase Stoicism, we measure it using several tools. One is the Liverpool Stoicism Scale, from different research teams around the world that show that it's unhealthy and it has multiple problems. Let me do a very quick deep dive, right? Because I think people should need to understand some of this stuff, right? And it's not complicated. So people who view anxiety or fear or sadness as bad and that they have to repress them or suppress them or conceal them from other people tend to, number one, there's a well-known phenomenon called the rebound effect or the paradox of thought suppression. So if people try to suppress a thought or a feeling that's automatic, it usually recurs more frequently and more vividly in the future, right? So there's a number of experiments that show that happening. Not consistently, but it happens enough times that it's a known phenomenon and a problem in psychotherapy. So trying to suppress negative feelings backfires in that way. We also know that people who judge the belief that anxiety is bad, for example, people who rate strong agreement with that statement show poorer outcomes long term in terms of their mental health. So viewing anxiety as bad, as shameful, as something you have to get rid of seems long term to predict mental health problems. We know that when people view a feeling or a thought as bad, they'll automatically... Your brain is designed by evolution to allocate attention automatically to threats. So if you're a rabbit and there's a hawk on the horizon or something like that, you're naturally going to give it all of your attention. It's kind of capturing your attention because it's a threat, right? If you think that your own tears are a threat, like if you think that your hands shaking is a threat, if you think that blushing is a threat, if you think that emotions or certain thoughts are a threat, your brain will allocate attention to them automatically. It will narrow its scope of attention down. It'll give attention to them highly selectively. You'll get tunnel vision for them, and that will magnify them and exacerbate the effect that they have on your behavior. In addition to those problems, like if you're focusing too much attention on coping with certain feelings rather than just accepting them and riding them out, it increases cognitive load. So for instance, somebody who has social anxiety, if they think, oh my God, having social anxiety means I'm weak, it means I'm not a real man, it means like I have to keep a poker face, I have to prevent other people from realizing that I'm scared inside because it's not manly enough or it's not tough enough or whatever. I've got to stop people from seeing it. That, in addition to actually just magnifying it, in addition to making it more likely to recur in the future, it's confusing because it means you're using a lot of your brain power now. You're trying to walk and chew gum at the same time. Right? So you try to have a conversation with somebody or give a wedding speech or something while also simultaneously worrying about and attempting to suppress and conceal your anxiety, like rubbing your tummy and patting your head or something like. We show that to clients in therapy. We do these things called socialization experiments. It's kind of a weird name, but that's what we call it. And you know, again, like trying to teach things in a natural way. So we take stuff that loads of complicated statistical research shows, go, how am I going to teach this to this 15-year-old kid that's like playing, bunking off school, playing hooky off school? And you'll say, tell me what you did yesterday. And just have a like normal conversation. And they'll say, okay, now do that again. Tell me what you did the day before yesterday, right? But this time I want you to imagine what your face looks like while you're doing it. Right? And I want you to be constantly paying attention to your breathing. And they'll be like, well, yesterday I had, and they go, it's kind of hard to concentrate while I'm doing all these things at the same time. And so you say, but that isn't that how you cope with social anxiety, right? You're imagining what your face is going to look like, and you're thinking about your breathing, for example. Maybe you're trying to control it because perhaps someone's told you that's a good idea. The things that you're doing are making your anxiety worse. They're making you feel awkward. They're overloading your brain. And that's going to cause you to forget what you're trying to say and to feel awkward in social situations. The internet's awash with bad self-help advice that clashes with stuff that we know from, you know, research and psychopathology and psychotherapy. Jordan Peterson is another guy that gives what I consider to be quite bad psychological advice at times.
I think he needs some psychological advice.
Over time, I think more people... It's like this thing of the voices dying off over time. Like, I think over time, Jordan Peterson's kind of dug himself a hole where a lot of his people who were passionately defending him at first are now like, okay, his behavior has maybe changed a bit over time. But he says things like, it's hard not to make fun of some of these guys, right? But this is what he says, like, blah, blah, blah lobsters, right? Because alpha lobsters hold their claws up in the air. This is what he writes at the beginning of 12 Rules. That's his argument, which is completely pseudoscientific and doesn't make any sense at all, right? And is, if I didn't know better, I would think he was joking when he said that. Like, that's what he says. But he recommends that people should stand up tall and look people in the eye when they're talking to them. Now, the reason he's saying that, weirdly, he doesn't mention this ever, but he's talking about something called the James Lange theory of emotion, which is a 19th century famous psychological theory that speculates that if people adopt certain physical posture and body language, it can affect how they feel emotionally. Yeah. And there's some truth in that. Yeah, fake it till you make it. Like, there's some truth in that. And the problem is, often we find in psychology, there are things that there's some truth in that don't, what the gold standard, this is my bias in CBT, we love randomized control trials. Because psychology is full of things that look like they should work but don't. Yeah. Right? So the James Lange theory kind of looks like it should work. It sort of makes sense. There's some validity to it. It's not entirely true. However, it doesn't necessarily pan out like that in clinical trials when you get people to do it in practice. Why not? Because there's competing factors at play. And one of them is that if you try and stand up straight all the time and make eye contact with people, you increase self-focused attention. And we know that that's one of the main things that exacerbates social anxiety. Interesting. So that's exactly the sort of thing that clients in therapy who have social anxiety disorder will tell you that they're already doing. They arrive at the problem, gate of therapy. The saying, we call them maladaptive coping strategies, but many maladaptive coping strategies, they're also called safety-seeking behaviors in therapy. Like, many of them are things that people have learned from self-help books. Not all of them, but many of them are. Andrew Tate's another one. You know, he'll tell people to do things to cope with their emotions, but he doesn't know anything about psychology. There are loads of other guys that are giving similar advice and appeal to the same audience, right? They're the kind of watered-down version of it. There are 101 Andrew Tate lights, right? And it's easier to pick him because he's already, to a large extent, debunked his own reputation because of the criminal.
Well, what I see is that audience exists, right? And you want to talk about the temptations of Seneca or any of these people. It's the same fundamental thing, which is those people exist, and there's something that they would like to be told that they will compensate you for telling them. And so the what you have to decide as a writer, as a creative, as a personality is you go, am I going to pander to that audience?
It's pandering.
Or am I going to say what I think is true and what's important? Am I going to do what's right?
I want everyone to hear this. Your interpretation, your slang, your framework. People are like, Gary, what about authenticity? I'm like, the most authentic thing in the world is the human being. Mm-hmm. Truly snowflake. None of us are the same.
Never again.
Twins, even twins, wired super differently inside. Yeah. Right? Uh-huh. I believe that's people walk away from their essence. Yeah. And I want them, I know you well enough to say this, and it's one of the biggest compliments I can give you. It has definitely worked for me, and I admire it whenever I see it. The people that really lean into themselves, like really don't try to put other things on a pedestal, other people, other opinions, just get really comfortable of the purest form of them. Yeah. Man, do they have impact, because that's where the uniqueness, that's the uniqueness. Like the way you say things, like the analogies, the stories, the interpretations, the subtle observations that are slightly tweaked, contextual to the moment. And that as a human, and that as an operator, and that as a parent, and as an executive, and that as an entrepreneur, and then as an author and a content creator, it all plays out. It all plays out.
Yeah, no one has ever been like you before. No one will ever be like you again. You have unique experiences, unique DNA. All that's totally unique. So why would you copy other people? Why would you try to be like someone else? You should be you. That's your monopoly.
I believe this is why I talk about patience so much. I think one of the reasons people do it is they want to get there faster. Yeah. Oh, Gary Vee did it. I'm going to be like him. I'm going to be crazy and loud and okay, cool. Like if you're a Jersey kid from the 80s, cool. You could probably get we probably over. But if you're an introvert from the South, and you've never cursed in your life, please don't make videos where you're cursing. It's gonna feel awkward. Just like if I'm just like why I was a little bored in reading my own book, because academia is a little bit I can glaze over, but I know why I wrote it.
People understand physical fitness, especially in the community, and that's where I was going. With the community that I'm popular for, they certainly understand physical fitness. Yeah. And so I'll have a seminar with a team and I'll say, I'm from another planet. I don't know what physical fitness is. Could you break it down for me? Well, of course.
Yeah. How much can you lift? How fast can you run? Yeah, sure, whatever.
Endurance, stamina. And until they say recovery time, I tell them that you don't understand fitness. Because until you understand the concept of recovery time,
sure,
being in shape means you can give 100% and 2 seconds later, take a couple of breaths and do it again, right?
Yeah.
So then I say, so then what is mental fitness? And then they dance all around. I said, I just gave you the answer.
Yeah.
And what we're talking about is training people to be able to understand that you can practice, train, and rehearse mental fitness.
Yes.
You can create a space in your brain where you begin to understand that you can recover faster than the average person. And that's where we're trying to get you. Because trials and tribulations, I don't care who you are and how much you love God, you're going to be tried.
Yes.
and so what we're talking about is recovery time.
Yeah.
The people who are mentally fit recover faster than the average person.
Yeah, if we take it for granted that a bunch of stuff in the course of a game or a season or a career is going to be outside of your control.
Yes.
What it really comes down to is how quickly can you respond to those things and respond well. Sometimes it's going to be this big thing, and sometimes it's just going to be your pregame workout is 5 minutes shorter than it usually is. Mm-hmm. Does that rattle you, or can you adjust quickly?
Or can you adjust quickly?
Yeah.
You're going to score, and you've been fantastic. Can you recover from success?
Yeah.
I mean, you can't just teach people to recover from failure. You got to teach people how to handle the ego.
Well, you think a game is 48 minutes.
Yes.
And then it goes into overtime. You budgeted for 48 minutes, and then there was overtime. You have to recover, not just physically, but you have to recover to the fact that in your mind, the game was almost over and you were done and you could go home, and then the other team rallied, and now you got to play another 5 minutes.
Yes, sir. That's the adjustment that you have to make. And again, the mental game is the game, and the ability to identify what's working and what's not working, not only in sports, but in my life.
Yeah.
You know, being able to identify healthy versus unhealthy relationships, being able to identify, to teach people critical assessment.
Yes.
How do I self-evaluate? How do I self-reflect? Self-reflection, mindfulness is popular now, but you have to be able to look at your life and become the world's greatest expert on who you are to become the best version of yourself.
When I imagine that's so hard as an athlete, because for the first, let's say, 18 years of your life, you really only had to be physically better than everyone else, right? You're just sort of brute force, physically, are you faster, bigger, stronger? And that's it.
But there's a small percentage who.
Yeah, I just mean like
typically, yes.
Athletes tend to have an intense
yes.
physical awareness of their body.
Yes, sir.
They are like they might be totally inarticulate in an interview. They might be failing all their classes, but they have a different kind of intelligence. They have a physical intelligence that is unmatched, right? But to be truly great, to get to the next level, they have to be as smart in the other, domains. You have to have multiple forms of intelligence, which is, to go to your point, the sort of, are you an expert in your triggers? Are you like, if you're the athlete that's, it's easy for people to get in your head, or, and you're not aware of that. You're just a mark to the next shark that comes along.
Well said.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about in one of the chapters we introduced the whole idea of SWOT analysis, which is MBA. We're doing consulting for corporate in America. We're going to look at the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities and threats to our success as an organization.
Yeah.
I snatched that, said, look, you're going to do a SWOT analysis, huh? Yeah. You're going to look at your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to your success.
Sure.
Oh. Then we take it to another level. I want you to identify 2 to 3 people who love you, who you trust, who are not going to abuse power.
Yeah.
And you're going to ask them at the same time, while you're writing your own, to write one and be brutally honest with you.
Yeah.
And then we're going to come back, we're going to look at yours.
Yeah.
And then we're going to process that, and then we're going to look at what the people who you trusted said.
Yeah.
And we're going to see where there's matches, where everyone has the same idea. They see something you don't see, because you have to be able to look at what's working in your life and what's not working.
Yeah.
And get feedback outside of your own ego. Because it's hard for some people to look at their weaknesses. And it's really hard for some people to look at their strengths.
It is funny how basic that is, though, right? I saw this interview with Sean Payton, and this was right before he took over in Denver, and someone was like, well, how are you going to turn around Russell Wilson, right? And he was like, I'm going to look at all the film, all the plays that he ran last year, and I'm going to look at the ones that did well, and I'm going to do more of those, and then I'm going to look at the ones that didn't go well, and we're going to play fewer of those.
Genius.
Yeah. And you're like, that's what you got $15 million for a season? But that's both really simple, but also not what most people do when they are trying to dig out of a hole or fix a situation. Like that's such a football coach way of thinking, but it's actually like such great advice for life. Where are you getting sales in your business? Where are you not getting sales? Let's do more of one and less of the other.
What's working? What's not working? So aside from doing clinical therapy, I'm talking about peak performance.
Yeah.
We've got to teach you how to identify what works and what doesn't work. But in order to take you to the next level, we're not just talking about on the field.
Yeah.
We're talking about in your daily living.
When are you and your spouse getting along?
Cool.
What are the sources of the conflict? Let's prepare ourselves for more of those and less of the other.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because I'm trying to convince people, say, for example, we're talking about athletes. I'm saying if you're a better person, you'll be a better athlete.
Yeah. Or just like how like the NBA recently was like, if we put the players on fewer back-to-back games, they get hurt less and they play better.
Genius.
Yeah, right. But that's the league doing the same thing. Mm-hmm. When do we have great games?
Yes.
What are great seasons? And what seem to be, the sources of seasons falling apart, or teams falling apart?
Yes.
It's just like, hey, you crushed it at that, meeting the other day. Why was that? Well, I slept really well the night before. Think you could have been onto something? You know?
For real, though.
Instead of just hoping that the factors line up, how do you arrange a life and a system and a routine, a set of practices that encourage more of that?
My big thing that I'm struggling with at the moment is if people are rude to me, or if someone's, if I'm having to deal with someone that's obnoxious, I get reactive back and I get shitty with them, and I ruminate.
Yeah,
I'm like, how dare that person?
Sure.
And Stoicism has been very, you go back to what does Stoicism say? Oh, you can't control them. Oh, of course. I have to control my reactions, and it's never wrong. I don't always like Stoicism.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily like the fact that it's a bit unforgiving.
Yeah.
But it hits real, and
what's funny? It's very forgiving to other people. It's not forgiving to you, right? Like, the passage that I have helped popularize, this one from Marcus Aurelius about how the obstacle is the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
What he's specifically talking about is difficult people.
Yeah,
He's saying that they are the opportunity for you to practice the Stoic ideas. It's so you could be trying to have a wonderful, loving, friendly conversation with someone, and then they can make that impossible, but they can't take away from you the opportunity to practice some other kind of virtue: patience, forgiveness, empathy. And I try to remind myself that that's when the Stoics say the obstacle is the way. They're not talking so much about pandemics or car crashes or injuries or bankruptcies. They're mostly talking about day-to-day interactions with annoying, obnoxious, frustrating, evil, stupid people.
And Marcus actually put it very plainly in his book. Each day you will
Right
wake
in the
up and
beginning.
there'll be annoying people. And it's like, oh, of course. And I love the quote by Seneca, we are bad men living amongst bad men, and only one thing will calm us, and that is we must go easy on each other.
Yes.
To me, that's the great calming quote, because I think if I was to diagnose one of society's biggest problems right now, it's anger.
Mm-hmm.
Anger seems to me, there's a huge sort of increase in reporting of domestic violence in Australia. I'm sure those statistics are across the board. Road rage has gone up, assaults. People, also every shop you go into, little signs saying don't abuse the staff.
So insane.
It's insane. So it's like, okay, we have an anger problem. Stoicism is so explicit in how you handle anger and how you stop yourself from becoming reactive. And I think if there's one thing I want the world to take from Stoicism at the moment, it's just dealing with anger. If we can do that.
There's a wonderful woman named Ashley who does the customer service for Daily Stoic.
All right.
And you should see some of the emails that she gets from people who ostensibly know and understand and follow Stoicism, people who just can't wrap their heads around the fact that we don't control the post office.
Yeah.
We're not the reason your package is delayed. That was the storm that you just experienced. That was the ocean that it had to cross. That was the person who stole it off your porch. It wasn't us.
Yeah.
And yelling at this poor lady doesn't magically make it go away. And it's been illustrated for me because I get to the airport and then the people tell you that the plane is delayed and that, I feel that. And I've certainly acted in ways in the past that I'm not proud of, but just this process of, hey, is this what in my control? Is this who I want to be? What opportunity is this presenting me? I think that passage from Marcus Aurelius that you mentioned, the famous one about how today the people you will meet, and he lists all the shitty things that people are going to be and do. But I think it's so easy we forget the second half of that, which is he goes, and why are they like this? He says, because they don't know any better. And he says, what they can't do is implicate you in their ugliness. That's the choice that you make. That part's on you. And he says, by the way, we're meant to work together. We're meant to be together.
We're two rows of teeth in the same mouth.
It's beautiful. Yeah. I mean, it's great writing and such a profound insight that the quote can work on this superficial level to the frustrated person who's just pissed off at humanity. And then also the second level, the wiser, more philosophical level of okay, I've calmed down a little bit. Here's how I should think about this.
And I think also just thinking about anger is that not being angry may not necessarily, you might not get on the plane earlier or whatever, but I think you're creating a situation where if you bring the temperature down in your own interactions, it does have a knock-on effect. I had breakfast with a friend yesterday who works as a volunteer counsellor for Lifeline, which is the
suicide hotline.
Yeah, suicide hotline. And I always like asking him when I see him, what's the main kind of thing that people are calling up about at the moment? What's the big issue? Previously, it's been addictions. During the pandemic, it was drinking too much. And now he's saying he's seeing a big rise in loneliness and that people feel like they don't have anyone close to them. And they also don't have any interactions necessarily that have got warmth in them either. So I think part of being a Stoic is not just to not be reactive, but also to be aware that if someone's angry at you or they're in a bad mood, what's behind that,
I think about those videos. They're very popular in the U.S. because we're awful to each other, but it's, it's some lady or some man freaking out at someone at the store. They're basically screaming, berating. Yeah. Sometimes they brandish a weapon, whatever. But I've tried when I would first see them, I would be like, fuck this person. What are they? Yeah. And then I've gotten better at going, what is that person's life like?
Yeah,
why did they break in line at the supermarket? What happened? Why did somebody cutting them off in line? Why did this thing not being on sale? what is happening? Their life must be a pressure cooker of stress and dysfunction, because this is not how they want to be acting.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
This isn't normal.
So I start each day with several practices as part of a morning routine, okay? And one of the things I do at the end is a journaling practice where I answer 3 questions, right? Which I'll share in just a moment. But going back to what I said about happiness before, and this kind of deep, what I call core happiness as opposed to junk happiness, the happiness that I think we're all really looking for, not the happiness that we might think we're looking for. Those 3 ingredients that I mentioned, alignment, contentment, and control, I think they're all important. They're all equally important to me. But that control one, I think, is really, really important, particularly in the world in which we live today. When I say control, I'm talking about a sense of control. Yeah. I'm not talking about controlling the external world, which is fundamentally, in so many ways, uncontrollable. And a lot of people, I think, get really frustrated and disempowered by the state of the world, politics, the news headlines, whatever it might be. And I understand that, but there are ways around that. And giving yourself a sense of control each day through your actions is a very powerful way to ground yourself and insulate you. And we know from the scientific research, people who have a strong sense of control over their lives, they're happier, they're healthier, they have better social relationships, they earn more money. There's a very strong relationship. So I have been teaching my patients for years about little 5, 10, 15-minute rituals that they can do each morning that helps to ground them. And even when I'm in America now, I'm traveling on this book tour. I've been in LA for 10 days. I'm in Austin for a couple of days. I bring a few things with me, like my coffee pot and my cafetiere. So I make coffee in the hotel room, and in the 5 minutes that it brews, I do a little strength workout in my pajamas. It's something I do at home, and it sounds simple and it sounds a bit unnecessary, but it actually is very helpful for me because it's a grounding practice that helps me feel, I've got a sense of control over my day. Right. So those 3 questions that I ask myself each day, I think really speak to your point, which is this idea that justice, virtue, being the person you want to be is an action, right? So I start off with my coffee, and the first question is, what is one thing I deeply appreciate about my life? Okay, really simple question. There's a lot of science on gratitude in terms of what it can do, and humans have this negativity bias that's kept us alive for many, many years. Yeah. But the truth is that we take in 9 bits of negative information for every 1 bit of positive information. So I say to a lot of my patients that you do have a morning routine. Even if you think you don't, the question is, are you intentional about it, right? If you wake up and in bed you scroll the news and Twitter and your work emails, you're entitled to do that, but it's going to have a consequence. If you infuse your brain with negativity first thing in the morning, is it any wonder that half an hour later you're a bit negative about the world, you're a bit reactive with your children or your partner, right? I'm not saying that's the only thing, but if you put that input in first thing, of course, the output 30 minutes later, 1 hour later, is going to be hugely dependent on what you put in. So instead, if you, let's say, start off with this practice of gratitude, what is one thing I deeply appreciate about my life? It changes the focus, and it's so simple. I can never say I don't have time to write that down. And I really challenge anyone, and I'm sure your audience, Ryan, are already familiar with journaling, and I'm sure much of your audience already are doing a journaling practice, right? But hopefully these 3 questions might give them a bit of... What's the third question? So the first question is, what is one thing I deeply appreciate about my life? The second question is, what is the most important thing I have to do today, which I love. It's probably my favorite question. And the third question is, what is the third question is, which quality do I want to showcase to the world today? And I tell you, those 3 questions are so simple, but they really change your relationship with your day and your relationship with yourself, right? So that second question, what is the most important thing I have to do today? It's incredibly powerful, because what I would see with patients, and I've experienced myself, is that these days we often only do the important things when everything else is done.
Mm-hmm.
But
after you've sucked out all the energy and
but our to-do lists are never done.
Yeah.
Right. And I've been heavily influenced by these regrets of the dying over the past few years. And I had a beautiful conversation with Bronnie Ware, the palliative care nurse, on my podcast maybe 3 years ago. And she wrote the book, The 5 Regrets of the Dying. And, you know, she basically said at the end of people's lives, they all say the same things. Yeah. I wish I'd worked less. I wish I spent more time with my friends and family. I wish I'd lived my life and not the life that other people expected of me, etc., right? So for me, it's like, okay, that's what people say at the end of their lives, commonly. I've also, with my clinical experience, seen many, many patients who kept thinking they could push through, work through evenings, work through weekends. And for many years, I would kind of see a lot of autoimmune disease, and in over 95% of cases, when you do a detailed history of their lives, you would see within the 6 months leading up to the diagnosis, heavy stress. I'm not saying it was the only cause, but a huge contributor to the onset of symptoms. And so I think, well, what is it about us as humans that we have to get sick before we start addressing the reality of life, or we have to wait till our deathbed to affect the reality of life? So for me, that question is a very simple way of focusing my attention on what is the most important thing I have to do today in a world where there are infinite things that we feel we have to do. And I think you may already know this, Ryan, given sort of all the research you've done over the years, but I learned from Greg McKeown a few years ago that when the word priority came into the English language in the 1500s, that it was only a singular word. Like it didn't exist in its plural form.
Is fun. Yes, sure.
And so I think many of us are drowning in our to-do lists. Yeah. And that question just cuts through all the noise and goes, what is the most important thing I have to do today? So in the week before I left for America, as I knew I was going to be away for 2 weeks, which is quite a long time for me to be away from my wife and kids.
Gone for 2 weeks.
It's the longest I've been away from them in a long time, okay? So I remember on the Monday of that week, when I was answering that morning question, it was a work deadline, right? So that's what I put down. I wrote down, I've got to get this blog back to Penguin that they need for the book, right? That doesn't mean that my relationship with my wife wasn't important that day, or my kids, or my other work. No, but the focus that day was, that's the most important thing I have to get done. On the Tuesday in the morning, again, this takes minutes to do, it was, you know what, my wife was away at the weekend. I'm going to be away for 2 weeks. I must make sure when the children are in bed that I spend some quality time with my wife. On the Wednesday, I remember clearly, because I was working from home that day, and I thought to myself, and this is what I commonly put down on working from home days, I put down at 4 p.m. when the children walk through the door from school, the most important thing I have to do today is make sure my laptop is shut and my phone's in a different room so I can be fully present with what they have to tell me.
Right.
So it's a very simple question that just helps me focus each day on, actually, you know what? That's the most important thing. That's the most important thing. And I would challenge, Ryan, your audience and say, listen, if there's nothing else you take from this conversation, but just answer that one question each day, and you then act on what you write down, it is inconceivable to me that your life will not feel different in 7 days. There are always things for most of us that we haven't done.
Yeah.
Right? So your brain is hardwired at the end of it. Oh God, I didn't get that done. I didn't get that done. I didn't get that done. Okay. You need to do something. You need to take action each day in some way to sort of insulate yourself against that. There are always going to be things that you don't do.
Yeah.
But you identify the one thing, you do it, and it means you start to change your relationship with yourself, because you start to feel like, yeah, I'm a winner. Like I'm winning each day. That third question, which quality do I want to showcase to the world today? What I love about that is we often think that the way we are is the way we have to remain. And it's simply not. Most of what we do each day is just repetition. We're repeating our past behaviors, our past thought patterns, and we can change that with intentionality. So for me in the morning, if I spend a minute going, what quality do I want to showcase to the world today? Okay, like today, when I wrote it in my journal, it was compassion. I want to show the world today the quality of compassion. that means I'm just that little bit more likely when I come across maybe an email that I don't like from my team, or someone who pulls in front of me if I'm driving, or whatever it might be. Yes, I could react, but the fact that I've said this morning, I want to show the world the quality of compassion, it makes it a little bit more likely that I'm not going to react.
Every day, I send out one Stoic-inspired email totally for free. Almost 1 million people all over the world. If you want to take your Stoicism journey to the next level, I would love for you to subscribe. It's totally for free. You can unsubscribe at any time. There's no spam. Just go to dailystoic.com/email. Love to see you there.